Brothers and sisters, let us pause for a moment and listen to the thunder rolling across the deserts of the Sahel. On the 23rd day of September, in the year 2025, three nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, rose from the dust and declared to the world, "We shall no longer bow before the judges of Europe." With one voice, they walked out of the International Criminal Court, calling it what many in Africa had long whispered, a colonial courtroom dressed in black robes of justice. For 2 decades, that court claimed universality, yet it hunted almost exclusively in Africa, while the powerful of the West remained untouched. But now the illusion is shattered. The Sahel has spoken. Your laws are not our chains. Your court is not our master. This is more than withdrawal. It is rebellion. It is a cry for African sovereignty, echoing through Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey. And beloved, if you believe in stories untold, if you seek truth that honors our past and our struggle, then stay with us. Subscribe, share, and join this community where Black voices rise and history is told in our own tongues. My people, listen closely. For on the 23rd day of September, in the year 2025, the world woke to a headline that thundered louder than cannon fire. In the still hours of dawn, three military-led governments, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, stepped forward as one. With a single statement, sharp as a blade, they cut ties with the International Criminal Court. No hesitation, no committees, no review panels, just a clean, unbending break. They said it plainly with words that cracked through the diplomatic fog. The ICC is an instrument of neo-colonial repression, an instrument in the hands of empires, they declared, not a sanctuary of justice. The Hague, once dressed in robes of authority, was stripped bare. But hear me now. This was not just a legal withdrawal, this was defiance. For 20 years, Africa sat in the dock, while Western leaders walked free. George Bush, untouchable. Tony Blair, untouchable. Emmanuel Macron, untouchable. Yet African heads of state, African soldiers, African rebels, paraded as trophies before the world. The illusion of equality was over, and the Sahel would no longer pretend. Yes, brothers and sisters, this was rebellion. Yet behind the roar, there were whispers. Whispers carried by the winds of politics. For some asked, why now? Why did Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, each under a junta born of coup and conflict, choose this moment to rise against the court? And the answer, my people, is layered. Some say it is the weight of war. In the Sahel, villages burn, children vanish into militias, armies bleed without rest. The Hague threatened to place those very armies under investigation. To the generals of Bamako, Ouagadougou, and Niamey, that was not justice. It was insult. Soldiers fighting for survival would not be shackled by distant judges. Others, wiser in the ways of geopolitics, point to Moscow. For do not forget, the ICC has issued a warrant for Vladimir Putin. And who now stands as friend and patron to these Sahel juntas? Russia. These governments, aligned with Moscow, cannot stand under a system that brands their ally a criminal. The withdrawal, then, is not only a cry of sovereignty, but a shield of alliance. And yet there is irony here, deep and sharp. For Mali itself once turned to the ICC, self-referring cases of atrocity within its borders. Once, the court was seen as a tool of cleansing, a promise that no crime would remain hidden. But today, that same Mali declares the court a colonial weapon. What changed? What shifted the ground beneath their feet? I tell you what changed: the tides of power. When the ICC served the political needs of these states, it was embraced. But when it threatened their armies, their leaders, their sovereignty, it was rejected. This contradiction, my friends, reveals both the strength and the fragility of this rebellion. Still, we cannot dismiss the fire. For no matter the motives, the symbolism is thunderous. Three nations, scarred by war yet unyielding, stood up to the West and said, "Your courtroom is not our destiny." And so the world watches, some with fear, some with awe, and many in Africa with a quiet rising pride. For whether born of conviction or convenience, this moment marks a rupture, a wound in the myth of international justice as it has long been preached. But my beloved, the story does not end here. For what makes this decision more than a headline, what turns it into an earthquake, is not the statement itself, but the reaction it unleashed. And when the declaration was made, beloved, the world trembled. In Brussels, the corridors of the European Union buzzed with unease. In Washington, voices whispered of a dangerous precedent, for this was no minor footnote in the long story of diplomacy. This was a rupture, a crack in the very facade of universality that the International Criminal Court claimed for itself. For 23 years, the ICC had held itself up as the guardian of justice for all nations. Yet its docket told a different story. Africa after Africa, leader after leader, trial after trial. From Sudan's Omar al-Bashir to Kenya's Uhuru Kenyatta, from the jungles of the Congo to the deserts of Libya, Africa had become the courtroom's hunting ground, and the people of the continent, weary and wounded, could see the pattern. Now 3 states had dared to name the truth aloud, and the reaction was swift. Western diplomats dressed their fear in polished words: deep concern, commitment to accountability, regret. But behind those phrases was panic. For if 3 could leave today, what would stop 5 more tomorrow? What would stop the African Union, already skeptical of The Hague, from leading a continental exodus? The anger of the West was matched by the pride of Africa. In Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Dakar, voices rose. At last, someone has said what we all knew. For decades, leaders had accused the ICC of double standards. They remembered how George Bush launched a war that shattered Iraq without consequence. How Tony Blair helped unleash the disaster of Libya, yet never saw a courtroom. How Israel's actions were rarely named, though the blood of Gaza cried out. And yet African presidents, African ministers, African generals, they alone bore the weight of international summons. So when the Sahel spoke, it spoke not only for itself, but for the continent's wounded dignity. But let us not deceive ourselves, brothers and sisters. This was not a choir singing in harmony, for even within Africa, there were divided voices. Some asked, are these governments truly defending sovereignty, or are they shielding themselves from scrutiny? Others whispered of alliances with Russia, of a shield raised not only for African dignity, but for Moscow's embattled leader. Yes, the ICC has a warrant for Vladimir Putin. Yes, these Sahelian juntas lean on Russian support. And yes, their withdrawal sends a message that resonates in Moscow as much as in Bamako. These complexities cannot be ignored. Yet hear this truth. Even if the motives are tangled, the message has power. For the withdrawal is not only legal, it is symbolic. It declares that Africa need not be judged by courts that will not judge themselves. It exposes the selective enforcement that has long been hidden beneath the robe of universality. In Washington, officials shifted uneasily. For America itself is no member of the ICC. The United States rejects its jurisdiction, yet insists others submit. That contradiction, long buried, now rises to the surface. How can Washington defend the ICC when it refuses the court for its own? And in the streets of Africa, ordinary people felt something stir. For the first time in years, their leaders had not bowed. They had not sought approval. They had stood tall, even if only for a moment, and said, your approval is no longer required. Beloved, this is the heartbeat of rebellion, anger against injustice, pride in defiance, and hope for freedom. Yet rebellion always raises the same haunting question. If the old order is broken, what will replace it? For what will justice look like without The Hague? What will accountability mean when the court is cast aside? Beloved, every act of rebellion carries a cost, and every break with the old world creates a vacuum. When Burkinafaso, Mali, and Niger tore up their membership with the International Criminal Court, they were not stepping into certainty. They were leaping into the unknown. And yet, they declared with unflinching voices, we will not return. What then are the consequences? What storm follows such defiance? First, the Sahel itself shifts. For these nations are not islands. They are bound together in the Alliance of Sahel States, the AES, born in 2023. This alliance, forged in the heat of insurgency and the ashes of coups, has become more than a military pact. It is a declaration of sovereignty. French troops expelled, Western bases shrinking, Russian advisors welcomed, and now an outright rejection of The Hague. The AES is no longer merely fighting militants, it is reshaping the rules of legitimacy in Africa. Second, sovereignty itself takes on flesh and blood. For in the deserts of Mali, in the villages of Burkina Faso, in the borderlands of Niger, sovereignty is not abstract, it is survival. Farmers hesitate to plant their crops for fear of insurgents. Families flee towns emptied overnight. Soldiers fight battles without equipment, burying their comrades in shallow graves. In such a crucible, the idea that foreign judges might summon African officers to stand trial in Europe is not just offensive, it is unbearable. Sovereignty in this sense is not theory, it is life and death. Third, justice itself must be reimagined. For rebellion cannot stand forever on negation. If the ICC is rejected, what then shall rise in its place? The juntas speak of indigenous mechanisms, justice built on African soil, justice spoken in African tongues. And though critics scoff, history whispers otherwise. Think of Rwanda after the genocide of 1994. The Gacaca courts, rooted in community traditions, heard over 1 million cases. Imperfect, yes. Inconsistent, yes. But they achieved what The Hague could not: speed, inclusivity, and an attempt at reconciliation. Think of Ghana, where chiefs and councils of elders still mediate disputes, weaving peace not through cold statute, but through dialogue and community trust. Think of the Sahel's own Islamic heritage, where Sharia courts historically resolve conflicts in villages where state authority never reached. These are not relics of the past. They are living traditions, blueprints for justice that is near, not distant, restorative, not alien. Yet the promise is heavy with risk. For will juntas accused of abuses against their own people truly allow impartial indigenous courts? Will communities scarred by violence have the strength to forgive and reconcile? Or will indigenous justice become another mask for impunity? Beloved, this is the tension. Rebellion creates hope, but it also raises fear. The withdrawal from the ICC is not merely the end of one chapter. It is the start of another. One where Africa must decide whether it can deliver justice without foreign hands, or whether the wounds of war will deepen without accountability. The consequence, then, is double-edged. On one side, the Sahel has struck a blow against hypocrisy, exposing the West's double standards for all to see. On the other side, it has placed the burden squarely on Africa's shoulders to prove that justice can be born here, nourished here, and upheld here. And so we must ask, my people, if not The Hague, then what? If not the robes of Europe, then whose hands shall deliver justice in Africa? Shall it be the chiefs, the elders, the imams, the community itself? Or shall it be lost in the shadows of power, another dream deferred? Brothers and sisters, let us now lift our eyes beyond the Sahel, for this story does not end in Bamako, Ouagadougou, or Niamey. The tremors have reached Washington, Brussels, Moscow, and Beijing. The world is watching, and the world is unsettled. Consider the United States. America has never joined the International Criminal Court. It has shielded its soldiers, its presidents, its generals from The Hague's reach. Yet now it finds itself in a peculiar place. On one hand, U.S. officials scold the Sahel juntas, warning of isolation and impunity. On the other hand, the American refusal to join the ICC stands as a glaring contradiction. How can Washington demand obedience to a court it never accepted for itself? The hypocrisy is visible, and Africans see it plainly. Meanwhile, in Europe, fear rises. For the ICC, though often criticized, was a pillar of Western influence. It carried moral weight, a cloak of legitimacy. Now 3 African states have burned that cloak in public, calling it a colonial relic. If others follow, the court's credibility may collapse entirely, leaving Europe stripped of one of its quiet instruments of control. And then look to Moscow. Russia, under sanction and under warrant, has found new friends in the Sahel. The withdrawal is more than symbolic. It is strategic. For by rejecting The Hague, these governments send a signal. We stand where the West does not. Putin, branded a criminal by the ICC, finds his reflection in African leaders branded the same. In defiance, they discover alliance. In Beijing and Ankara, in Tehran and beyond, the message is not lost. The old monopoly of justice is breaking. The world is no longer unipolar. The ICC, once presented as universal, is exposed as selective, fragile, and dependent on voluntary allegiance. Beloved, do you see what is unfolding? This is larger than law. This is larger than treaties. This is about power. For if the ICC loses Africa, it loses the claim of universality. And if the West loses the ICC, it loses one of its last levers of moral authority over the global South. But the question remains, if the old order trembles, what new order shall rise? Beloved, the question now is not only about departure, it is about destination. If the Sahel has torn away from the International Criminal Court, what road lies ahead? What vision will guide them through the storms that follow? Some see only chaos, warning that without The Hague, impunity will reign. But others, my brothers and sisters, see possibility. The possibility of building justice with African hands, rooted in African soil. Imagine, if you will, an African court of sovereign justice, born under the banner of the African Union. Judges drawn from across the continent, blending the precision of modern law with the wisdom of our traditions. A court that does not erase history but remembers it. Colonial crimes, invasions, interventions, all weighed alongside the atrocities within our own lands. This is not fantasy. Rwanda's Gakaka showed us the speed and power of community-led justice. Ghana's councils of elders continue to heal disputes through dialogue. In the Sahel, Islamic traditions of accountability have long guided villages. These are seeds that, if nurtured, could grow into a system that is ours and ours alone. But beloved, the stakes are high. If Africa succeeds in shaping its own justice, then never again will it stand merely as the accused in foreign courts. It will stand as author of its destiny, arbiter of its truth. Yet if it fails, the West will seize upon the failure, declaring, "See, Africa cannot govern itself without us." And so the path ahead is both promise and peril. It demands courage, wisdom, and unity. It demands leaders who are not merely protecting themselves, but serving their people. It demands communities willing to speak truth, even when truth is painful. Brothers and sisters, the fire has been lit. The script of dependence has been burned. But the story yet to be written is this: can Africa transform defiance into creation, rebellion into renewal? The Sahel has struck the match. The flame is rising. The question is, will the continent let it burn, or will it smother its own fire? Brothers and sisters, as the dust settles on this chapter, let us remember what has truly been declared. This is not only about 3 nations in the Sahel. This is about the soul of a continent. This is about whether Africa shall forever sit in the dock, or whether it shall rise to judge itself with dignity. The departure from the International Criminal Court is more than a withdrawal. It is a statement to the world: our chains are broken. Our destiny is our own. But freedom is not simply the absence of bondage. Freedom is the presence of responsibility. African sovereignty must not only be proclaimed, it must be practiced. It must be lived in the courts, in the villages, in the parliaments, and in the daily lives of our people. Yes, the West will resist. Yes, there will be voices calling this rebellion dangerous, reckless, self-serving. But remember this: for centuries, Africa was told that its justice was inferior, its traditions backward, its people incapable of self-rule. Yet here we stand, at the threshold of proving the opposite. Here we stand with the chance to write law, not in the ink of empire, but in the blood and resilience of our ancestors. The road ahead is not easy. It will require building, not just tearing down. It will require patience, not only passion, but the hope is alive, my people. And hope, when joined with courage, becomes power. So I ask you, do you believe this is the hour of African sovereignty fulfilled? Do you believe this is the moment when Africa ceases to be the object of judgment and becomes its own judge, its own defender, its own author of justice? If you do, then walk with us. Stand with us. Subscribe, share, and let your voice rise in the comments. Tell us, Can Africa build a system stronger, fairer, truer than The Hague itself? The fire is lit, the path is open, and the future of African sovereignty is waiting to be written by us, for us, and with us.